The text message wasn't meant for me. That's how I discovered my husband was sleeping with my best friend. I'm Bethany, and until 3 minutes ago, I thought I had it all. A successful business partnership, a loving marriage of 8 years, and a tight-knit circle of friends. Amazing how one misplaced message can shatter everything you believe in. Sorry, baby. Had to pretend to work late again. Beth bought it like always. See you at our spot in 30, eh? My hands trembled as I set Amir's phone back on his desk. He'd left it there while showering, probably feeling secure that I'd never snoop. And I hadn't been snooping. I'd only picked it up when it kept buzzing with notifications. The bathroom door clicked open. I forced myself to breathe normally, scrolling through a random document on my laptop as Amir walked into our home office. "Hey, love," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Working late again?" The irony made my stomach turn. "Just finishing some contracts," I managed. "You heading out?" "Yeah, emergency meeting with Samuel about the Morrison account." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily. "Don't wait up." I watched him grab his phone, my mind racing. Vada. It had to be Vada. The pieces were falling into place. The late meetings, the business trips, the way they looked at each other during company events. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I called Quinn. "I need you to come over, now." "What's wrong?" Quinn's voice sharpened with concern. "Just come, please." 20 minutes later, we sat in my kitchen, a bottle of wine between us. I showed her the text I'd photographed with my phone. "That snake," Quinn hissed. "I'll kill them both." "No," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "I have a better idea." I pulled out my laptop and opened our company's operating agreement. 3 years ago, when Amir, Vata, and I had merged our businesses, we'd included a clause that seemed insignificant at the time. If any partner engaged in activities damaging to the company's reputation, their shares could be forcibly bought out at a preset value. "Look at this," I showed Quinn. "They think they're being clever, sneaking around behind my back. But they have no idea what's coming." "What are you planning?" I pulled up our company's financial records. "First, I need to talk to Samuel. He's been handling our accounts, and I bet he knows more than he's letting on." "Samuel, can you trust him?" "He's been trying to warn me for weeks. All those casual conversations about irregular expenses, suggesting I take a closer look at the books. I was too blind to see it." My phone buzzed. A text from Allison, Amir's sister. "Dinner this weekend? Haven't seen you in ages." Perfect. Allison had always been closer to me than to her own brother. She'd be devastated when she found out, but for now, she could be an unwitting source of information. "I'm gonna play the fool," I told Quinn. "Let them think they're winning. Meanwhile, I'll be documenting everything. The affairs, the suspicious financial transactions, all of it." Quinn leaned forward. "And then what?" I smiled, though it felt more like baring my teeth. "They're throwing that ridiculous party next month. You know, the one where they're planning to announce my stepping down from the company. Let's just say it won't go quite the way they're expecting." "Beth," Quinn hesitated. "Are you sure about this? You could just confront them, get a divorce, walk away." I shook my head. "They're not just trying to humiliate me, Quinn. They're trying to take everything I've built. My company, my reputation, my life." I took a deep breath. "I won't let them." My phone buzzed again. Amir. "Meeting running late. Don't wait up. Love you." I typed back quickly. "No problem, honey. Take your time." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "You're scary when you're plotting revenge. You know that?" "I'm not plotting revenge," I corrected her, closing my laptop. "I'm ensuring karma arrives right on schedule." As Quinn left that night, I stood in my empty house, feeling strangely calm. The initial shock and pain were still there, but they'd been pushed aside by something stronger, determination. Amir and Vada thought they were so clever, playing their little games. They had no idea they were about to learn a vital lesson. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I picked up my phone and texted Samuel. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., usual coffee shop. Come alone." His response was immediate. "Finally, I've been waiting for this conversation." Samuel was already waiting when I arrived at the coffee shop, 2 steaming cups on the table. His usual crisp suit looked wrinkled, like he'd slept in it. "You look terrible," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Been up all night reviewing the books." He pushed a folder toward me. "You finally saw the messages? How long have you known?" He rubbed his face. "About the affair? 3 months. About the money? That's more recent." I opened the folder and my breath caught. Page after page of suspicious transactions, all authorized by Vada, all just under the threshold that would require my signature. "They've been siphoning money into a separate account," Samuel explained. "Small amounts, but it adds up. Nearly 500,000 so far." "Show me everything." For the next hour, Samuel walked me through their scheme. While I'd been focused on expanding our client base, Vada had been systematically undermining our financial stability. Amir had provided cover, distracting me with fake crises while she worked. My phone buzzed. "Quinn, turn on channel 7 now." I pulled out my tablet, and Samuel leaned in to watch. There was Vada, being interviewed about women in business. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. "And sometimes the hardest part is knowing when to step aside," Vada was saying, her practiced smile perfect for the cameras. "Some people just aren't cut out for leadership." Samuel swore under his breath. "They're setting the stage. The party next month. They're planning to force you out publicly." "I know," I closed the folder. "But they made a mistake." "What's that?" "They forgot who taught them everything they know about business." I pulled out my own folder. "Remember that merger agreement you helped draft 3 years ago?" His eyes widened as he read. "The reputation clause, but can you prove the affair?" "Better." I showed him my phone displaying a banking app. "I can prove the embezzlement. Quinn's been tracking their private accounts. They've been careless." "Jesus, Beth." He looked impressed. "You've been busy." "I learned from the best. Remember that hostile takeover case you handled last year?" He grinned. "The one where we caught the CEO." "With his own paper trail," I finished. "Exactly." My phone buzzed again. Amir. "Lunch today? Miss you." I showed Samuel the message. "They think they're so clever." "What's your next move?" "First, I need to talk to Allison. She handles their personal investments. She just doesn't know she's been helping them hide money." "Be careful," Samuel warned. "One wrong move and they'll know you're on to them." "Trust me, they won't suspect a thing." I stood up. "I've got lunch with my loving husband to get to." At the restaurant, Amir was already waiting, looking perfectly put together in his designer suit. The sight of him made my stomach turn, but I smiled as I sat down. "Sorry I'm late, honey. Got caught up with Samuel reviewing some contracts." Amir's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Samuel? What contracts?" "Oh, just routine stuff." I waved dismissively. "Actually, I wanted to talk about the party next month. Vada mentioned wanting to make some kind of announcement." "Did she?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I hadn't heard." I took a sip of water. "Well, I was thinking of making an announcement of my own." "What kind of announcement?" "It's a surprise." I smiled sweetly. "But I think everyone will be very interested." For a moment, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. Then his phone buzzed, and I knew without looking who it was. "Work?" I asked innocently. "Yeah, sorry." He was already standing. "Rain check on lunch? This is urgent." "Of course, honey. Give Vada my best." He froze for a split second before recovering. "What makes you think it's Vada?" Just a guess. She always seems to need you urgently these days. I watched him hurry away, then pulled out my phone to text Quinn. They're panicking. Time for phase 2. Quinn replied immediately. Allison's expecting you at 3. She has no idea what's coming. I gathered my things, leaving cash for the untouched lunch. In 3 weeks, they would try to destroy everything I'd built. They thought they were the predators, but they were about to learn they were actually the prey. My phone buzzed one more time. Samuel, just found something else in the books. You're going to want to see this. I smiled. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Sometimes karma needs a little help arriving on schedule, and I was more than happy to assist. Allison's penthouse office had a view of the city that usually took my breath away. Today, I barely noticed it. She was hunched over her desk, surrounded by investment portfolios, including the ones she managed for Amir and Vada. Beth! She jumped up to hug me. I've missed you. How are you holding up with all the company drama? Drama? I kept my voice carefully neutral. The restructuring? Amir mentioned you might be stepping back soon. She frowned, though he was weirdly vague about it. Actually, that's why I'm here. I sat down, pulling out the documents Samuel had given me. I need your expertise on something. Of course. What are sisters for? She beamed, reminding me why this was going to hurt so much. Allison had always treated me more like family than Amir ever had. These transactions, I spread the papers across her desk. What do you make of them? She studied them, her expression growing increasingly troubled. These are from accounts I manage, but I didn't authorize these transfers. No, I said softly. Vada did, using your credentials. What? She grabbed her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. That's impossible. Only I have access to... Oh, God. I watched as the color drained from her face. When did you last change your passwords, Allison? 6 months ago, when we updated our security protocols. She looked up, horror dawning. Amir helped me set up the new system, and now your credentials have been used to move money into offshore accounts. I slid another document across the desk. Accounts that, coincidentally, belong to your brother and his girlfriend. Girlfriend? Allison's voice cracked. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, showing her the text messages I'd photographed. I'm sorry, Allison. I really am. She read them, hands shaking. That son of a bitch. That absolute... She stopped, looking up sharply. They used my credentials. I could go to jail for this. No, I said firmly. You won't, because you're going to help me stop them. Her laugh was bitter. How? They've already moved the money. But they haven't spent it. I smiled. And more importantly, they haven't filed the paperwork for next quarter's taxes. Paperwork that requires your signature. Understanding dawned in her eyes. If I don't sign, their whole house of cards collapses. I leaned forward, but we need to time it right. My phone buzzed. Samuel. Meeting with board members set for party night. Everything in place. The party, Allison said, watching me text back. That's when they're planning to force you out, isn't it? That's what they think. I showed her the company agreement, but they forgot about this clause. And now, thanks to their creative accounting using your credentials, we can prove they've damaged the company's reputation. They'll lose everything, she whispered. They already decided to lose everything, I corrected her. They just didn't realize they'd be the ones paying the price. Allison stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city. What do you need me to do? For now, nothing. Sign the tax documents like normal. But the night of the party, I handed her a USB drive. You'll know when to use this. She took it, her hand steady now. They're my family, Beth. And what am I? She turned, tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. You're my sister, the one who actually deserves the title. My phone buzzed again, Vada this time. Dinner tomorrow, need to discuss party details. I showed Allison the message. Looks like your brother's girlfriend wants to plan my farewell party. Go, Allison said. Let them think everything's fine. I'll handle things on my end. As I stood to leave, she grabbed my arm. Beth, make it hurt. I hugged her tightly. That's the plan. Outside, I texted Quinn. Allison's in. Everything's set. Quinn replied, Vada's been calling around trying to get dirt on you. Should I be worried? Let her dig. I texted back. She won't find anything, but I found something very interesting in her past. What? Let's just say this isn't the first company she's tried to steal, but it will be the last. I got into my car, checking my calendar. 2 weeks until the party. 2 weeks until they tried to destroy me. 2 weeks until they learned what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. My phone buzzed one last time. Amir. Working late again, don't wait up. I smiled as I typed, no problem, honey, sweet dreams. The pieces were all in place. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment to strike. Dinner with Vada was an exercise in restraint. She sat across from me at her favorite upscale restaurant, sipping wine and discussing party details as if she wasn't sleeping with my husband. I was thinking we should invite the entire board, she said, scrolling through her phone. Make it a real celebration. Of what exactly? I asked innocently. She looked up, that practiced smile never wavering. Your years of service, of course. Everyone should hear about how much you've contributed. My phone buzzed under the table. Quinn, just got the files from Samuel. You need to see these now. Excuse me, I said, standing. Bathroom break. In the privacy of the restroom, I called Quinn. Remember how we wondered where Vada got her startup money? Quinn's voice was electric with excitement. Well, Samuel found her old business records. She did exactly this before, married her business partner, then tried to push him out of the company. Let me guess, it worked? Better. The guy disappeared. Just vanished one day, leaving everything to her. The police investigated but couldn't prove anything. I felt a chill. Send everything to Allison. She'll know what to do with it. Back at the table, Vada was typing furiously on her phone. I caught a glimpse of Amir's name before she put it away. Everything okay? I asked. Perfect. She waved the waiter over. More wine? Actually, I had a question about the quarterly reports, I said casually. Some of the numbers seem off. Her smile flickered for just a moment. Oh? Probably nothing. I'll have Samuel look into it. Samuel? She set her glass down too hard. He's been asking a lot of questions lately. Has he? I hadn't noticed. My phone buzzed again. Samuel. Board meeting set for tomorrow. They're making their move early. Something wrong? Vada asked, watching my face. Not at all. I stood up. But I should go. Big day tomorrow, right? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Right. Outside, I called Samuel immediately. They're calling an emergency board meeting, he confirmed, trying to force a vote before the party. Perfect, I smiled into the phone. Is everything ready? Just got confirmation from the SEC. They'll be there. Good. And the other thing? Quinn found 3 more ex-business partners, all with similar stories, all willing to testify. I got into my car just as another text came through. Amir, where are you? We need to talk. I drove home to find him pacing in our living room. Have a nice dinner? He asked, voice tight. Lovely. Vada sends her love. He flinched. Beth, we need to discuss the company's future. Funny, that's exactly what I was going to say. I sat down calmly. Board meeting tomorrow, right? How did you know? I pulled out my laptop. The same way I know about these. I turned the screen toward him, showing the financial records. His face went pale. Those are confidential. So is my marriage, but that didn't stop you. Beth, save it. I stood up. See you at the meeting. My phone buzzed as I walked upstairs. Allison. SEC documents filed. Everything's ready. I texted back. Perfect. How's our other project? Police are very interested in Vada's past. Very interested. In our bedroom, I packed a small bag while Amir shouted through the door. I had no intention of staying here tonight. Quinn was waiting at her place with wine and takeout. You should have seen his face, I told her, settling onto her couch. He actually thought I didn't know. Men always underestimate us, she said, pouring generous glasses. What time's the meeting tomorrow? 9 a.m. Vada thinks they have the votes to force me out. But 3 board members owe me favors, big ones. I smiled. And they're very interested in keeping their own creative accounting private. My phone lit up. Samuel. SEC agents confirmed for 9:30. Should be perfect timing. Quinn raised her glass. To karma. To karma, I agreed. And to always keeping receipts. Later that night, as Quinn slept on the couch, I sat on her balcony watching the city lights. Tomorrow would change everything. Amir and Vada thought they were about to win. They had no idea they were walking into their own destruction. My phone buzzed one last time. Vada. Looking forward to tomorrow. Time for some changes. I typed back. Me too. Time for everything to come out in the open. The pieces were set. The trap was ready. In less than 12 hours, they would learn the true cost of betrayal, and I would be there to watch them fall. The boardroom was silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning. I sat at my usual place, watching Amir and Vada exchange confident glances across the table. They thought this was their moment of triumph. Before we begin, I said pleasantly, I'd like to introduce some guests. The door opened. 2 men in suits entered, followed by Samuel and Allison. Who are they? Vada demanded, her smile slipping. SEC investigators, I replied. They're very interested in our company's financial records. Amir stood up so quickly his chair nearly toppled. This meeting is private. Sit down, Mr. Wade, one of the agents said. We have a warrant. The board members shifted uncomfortably. I could see the panic spreading across Vada's face as Samuel began distributing folders. What you're looking at, Samuel explained, is evidence of systematic fraud and embezzlement. These accusations are ridiculous, Vada snapped, but her hands were shaking as she opened the folder. Are they? Allison stepped forward. Because those transactions were made using my credentials that only 2 other people had access to. The color drained from Amir's face. Allison, what are you doing? The right thing. Finally. She turned to the board. My brother and Ms. Jenkins have been stealing from this company for months, and that's not all. I nodded to Samuel, who pulled up a presentation on the screen. This is interesting, he said, clicking through documents. Ms. Jenkins has quite a history of similar situations. 3 previous companies, 3 previous partners, all mysteriously pushed out or disappeared. You can't prove anything, Vada hissed, but the board members were already murmuring among themselves. My phone buzzed. Quinn, police just arrived, ready when you are. Actually, I said, standing up, we can prove everything, including the affair. Amir flinched. Beth, please. Save it. I turned to the board. Article 7.3 of our company agreement states that any partner engaging in activities damaging to the company's reputation can be forcibly removed. I moved to invoke that clause. You don't have the votes, Vada said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Don't I? I looked around the table. Mr. Phillips, Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Thompson, shall we discuss your own financial irregularities? The ones I agreed to overlook in exchange for your support today? The 3 board members I'd named sat up straighter. One by one, they raised their hands. The motion passes, Samuel announced. Effective immediately, Amir Wade and Vada Jenkins are removed from their positions. You can't do this, Vada shrieked, standing up. This is my company, too. Not anymore. I nodded to the SEC agents, and I believe these gentlemen have some questions about those missing funds. The doors opened again, and two police officers entered. Ms. Jenkins, one said, we need you to come with us. We have some questions about your previous business partner's disappearance. I watched as they led Vada away, her perfect composure finally cracking. Amir tried to follow, but Allison blocked his path. The divorce papers are being delivered to your office, she told him coldly. I'd sign them quickly if I were you, before more evidence comes to light. The boardroom emptied quickly, leaving me alone with Samuel and Allison. That went well, Samuel said, gathering the folders. It's not over, I replied, checking my phone. The party's still on for tonight. You're still having the party? Allison asked incredulously. Of course, they wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. I smiled. It would be rude to deny them their moment in the spotlight. My phone buzzed again. Quinn, Vada's being booked now. Want to see the mugshot? Save it for the party, I texted back. Beth, Allison said softly, are you sure about this? They've lost everything already. Not quite everything. I looked out the window at the city skyline, my city now. They still have their pride, for about 6 more hours. Samuel whistled low. Remind me never to cross you. Just remember, I said, gathering my things, karma doesn't always work on its own schedule. Sometimes it needs a little push. My phone lit up one last time. Amir. Please, we need to talk. I showed the message to Allison and Samuel. Looks like someone's desperate. What are you going to say? Allison asked. I typed quickly. See you at the party, honey. Don't be late. You won't want to miss my speech. As we left the boardroom, I felt lighter than I had in months. Tonight, at the party they'd planned to destroy me, everyone would learn the truth. And tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding, stronger, wiser, and completely free of their shadows. Ready for tonight? Samuel asked as we reached the elevator. I smiled. I've been ready for this my entire life. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom sparkled with champagne glasses and forced smiles. Vada had chosen the venue weeks ago, planning to celebrate my downfall in style. Instead, she was spending the evening in police custody while I adjusted my red dress in the mirror. Ready? Quinn appeared behind me, looking stunning in black. Almost. I checked my phone. No new messages from Amir since his desperate plea earlier. Is everything set up? Screens are ready. Samuel has the presentation queued up. She handed me a champagne flute. Allison just texted. Amir's here, trying to convince people everything's fine. I stepped into the ballroom, and the whispers started immediately. News of the morning's board meeting hadn't spread widely yet, but people could sense something was off, especially since Vada was conspicuously absent. Beth! Amir hurried over, his smile strained. Can we please talk? Of course, honey. I raised my voice slightly. Would you like to discuss the embezzlement or the affair first? Several nearby conversations stopped abruptly. Amir grabbed my arm, trying to pull me aside. Don't make a scene, he hissed. Why not? Isn't that what this party was for? I pulled away from him. You and Vada planned quite the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Samuel's voice boomed through the speakers. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd turned toward the small stage where Samuel stood, remote control in hand. Behind him, large screens flickered to life. We're here tonight to celebrate truth and consequences, he continued, and nobody understands those better than our CEO, Beth. I made my way to the stage, feeling hundreds of eyes following me. Amir stood frozen in the crowd, his face ashen. Thank you all for coming, I said into the microphone. This party was originally planned as my farewell celebration, a chance for my husband and his girlfriend to publicly humiliate me before taking my company. The gasps were audible. On the screens, financial records began to appear. Instead, let's talk about what really happened. Samuel, would you do the honors? He clicked through the slides. Bank statements, transfer records, emails between Amir and Vada planning their takeover. And here's my personal favorite, I said as a police mugshot appeared on screen. This was taken of Vada just hours ago. Turns out she has quite the interesting history with making business partners disappear. Amir pushed through the crowd. Stop this. Why? I turned to face him. Isn't this what you wanted? Everyone gathered to witness a dramatic revelation? You're destroying everything. No, honey, you did that yourself. I nodded to Quinn, who pressed a button on her phone. The screens filled with text messages, hundreds of them between Amir and Vada, dating back months. Their plans, their mockery, their betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. I particularly like this one, I said, pointing to a message. Beth's too stupid to notice. She trusts me completely. That was you, right, darling? The crowd had gone completely silent. In the back, I saw Allison step forward, tears streaming down her face. You used my credentials, she said to Amir. Your own sister. You made me an accomplice to fraud. Allison, I can explain. Save it for your lawyer, she cut him off. The SEC has everything they need. I raised my champagne glass. A toast to truth, to karma, and to never underestimating a woman with access to good lawyers and better friends. The screens changed one final time, showing the morning's board meeting results. Amir's removal, Vada's arrest, my complete control of the company. Security, I called out pleasantly. Mr. Wade seems to be having trouble finding the exit. Two guards appeared, moving toward Amir. He looked around wildly, but found no sympathy in the crowd of shocked faces. You won't get away with this, he snarled as they approached. I already have, I smiled. Oh, and honey, I've changed the locks at home. Your things are in storage. The address is in the divorce papers. As they led him out, the ballroom erupted in chatter. Quinn appeared at my side with a fresh glass of champagne. Now that, she said, was a party to remember. My phone buzzed. Samuel. Police want to know if you'll testify about Vada's past activities. Tell them I'd be happy to, I texted back. The screens returned to their elegant party displays, but the damage was done. Every person in the room had witnessed Amir and Vada's downfall. Every business contact, every friend, every potential ally. Was it worth it? Quinn asked softly. I watched as Allison hugged Samuel, both of them looking relieved and exhausted. Ask me tomorrow, I replied, raising my glass. Tonight we celebrate. The party continued, but it was no longer a farewell. It was a beginning. The morning after the party, I walked into my office to find it already occupied. Amir sat in my chair looking disheveled in yesterday's suit. Security breach in the executive suite, I said into my phone. Send backup. Wait, he held up his hands. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. You have 2. I stayed by the door, hand on the handle. Starting now. I can fix this, he said desperately. The board, the money, everything. Just call off the SEC. Interesting offer. I checked my watch. Considering Vada's preliminary hearing starts in an hour. His face crumpled. You don't understand. If they dig too deep, they'll find what happened to her other partners. I pulled out my phone, showing him an email. Too late. The investigation's already connecting the dots. She said they left voluntarily. And you believed her? I laughed. Like she believed you when you said you'd handle me? Security appeared in the doorway. Amir stood up, straightening his jacket with trembling hands. "You've ruined everything," he said. "No, I survived everything. There's a difference." As they let him out, my phone buzzed. "Quinn, turn on the news now." I flipped on the office TV just in time to see Vada being led into the courthouse, her designer outfit replaced by prison orange. The headline scrolled beneath, "Tech CEO arrested, multiple fraud investigations opened." Samuel burst in without knocking. "Have you seen?" "I'm watching it now." "Not that." He handed me his tablet. "This just came in from the forensic accountants." I scanned the document, my breath catching. "Is this verified?" "Triple checked. They didn't just steal from the company. They were setting you up to take the fall for everything." My phone rang. "Allison, are you watching the news?" "Better. I'm reading the forensic report. Did you know about their plan to frame you?" "No." Her voice cracked. "But I just found something else. Remember that partner of Vada's who disappeared? They found him." I sat down hard. "Alive?" "No. And Amir's fingerprints are all over the evidence." The office door opened again, Quinn this time, looking grim. "Police are here," she said. "They want to talk to you about Amir." I put Allison on speaker. "Did you hear that?" "I'm on my way," she said. "Don't say anything until I get there." Two detectives entered my office, faces serious. "Ms. Wade, we need to discuss your husband's whereabouts 3 years ago." "Ex-husband," I corrected, "and my lawyer's on her way." "You might want to see this first." One detective placed a photo on my desk. It showed Amir and Vada, dated 3 years ago, before I'd even met either of them. They were standing over a man I recognized from the missing persons reports. They were working together even then. Samuel whispered. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? Ask your friend Quinn about the night James disappeared." I showed Quinn the message. Her face went white. "James was my brother," she said quietly. "He disappeared after investigating a tech startup. I never knew until I saw Vada's picture in your company files." The pieces clicked into place. Quinn's help, her determination, her expertise in tracking financial fraud. It hadn't just been friendship driving her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed proof." She wiped away tears. "And now we have it." The detectives took notes as Quinn explained everything. By the time Allison arrived, they had enough to arrest both Amir and Vada for murder. "It's over," Allison said, watching the detectives leave. "Really over." My phone buzzed one last time. "Samuel, board wants to meet. They're talking acquisition offers." "No," I texted back. "This company stays mine." Quinn touched my arm. "What now?" I looked around my office, at Samuel's worried face, at Allison's tears, at Quinn's years of hidden pain. "Now we rebuild," I said. "But first, we make sure justice is served, all of it." My phone lit up with news alerts. Amir had been arrested trying to flee the country. Vada was cooperating with authorities, turning on him to save herself. "Karma," Quinn said softly. "No," I replied. "Justice, and it's not finished yet." I picked up my phone to call the district attorney. It was time to make sure every single one of their victims got closure, starting with Quinn's brother. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting my office in shades of gold and shadow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, watching Amir and Vada's mugshots on the news, I finally felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered. I sat between Quinn and Allison, our hands linked together as we waited for the verdict. Across the aisle, Vada's expensive lawyer shifted nervously in his seat. "In the matter of the state versus Vada Jenkins," the judge began, "on the count of first-degree murder." Quinn's grip tightened on my hand. "Guilty." The word echoed through the courtroom. In the front row, Vada crumpled, her perfect facade finally shattering completely, on the counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word felt like another brick being lifted from my shoulders. As they led Vada away, she turned to glare at me one last time. "This isn't over," she spat. "Actually, it is." Quinn stood up, her voice steady. "That was for James." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Samuel appeared, creating a path through the crowd. "Amir's plea deal just came through," he said as we reached the car. "He's testifying against their entire network, multiple jurisdictions involved." My phone buzzed. A news alert showing Amir being led into another courthouse, head bowed, finally looking like the broken man he was. "The company stock is up 15%, Allison said, checking her tablet. "The market loves a justice story." Speaking of justice, Quinn pulled out an envelope. The insurance company finally settled James's case. They're funding a scholarship in his name for fraud investigators. I smiled. He would have loved that. Back at the office, I found a package waiting on my desk. Inside was a framed newspaper article. "Tech CEO takes down criminal enterprise. Justice served." "A little gift," Samuel said from the doorway. "Thought your wall needed updating." "It's perfect." I hung it next to my degrees, though we're not quite finished. "The foundation?" Quinn asked, entering with coffee. I nodded. "The James Quinn Foundation for Corporate Accountability, using our resources to help other victims of corporate fraud." "Using their seized assets to fund it," Allison added, joining us. "Poetic justice." My phone lit up, a message from the district attorney. "5 more victims identified. Your testimony made the difference." "You know," Samuel said, "most people would just enjoy their victory. Most people didn't have front row seats to what corporate predators can do." I looked at Quinn. "Or lose family to them." The intercom buzzed. My assistant. "The new board members are here for orientation." "Send them in," I replied, then turned to my team. "Ready to build something better?" They nodded, and we watched as the new board filed in. All women, all experts in corporate ethics and accountability. "Welcome," I said. "Let's talk about the future." As the meeting began, my phone buzzed one last time, a text from the prison warden. "Ms. Jenkins requested a meeting." "No," I typed back. "She's exactly where she belongs." Quinn caught my eye across the conference table and smiled. We'd both found our closure, our justice, our peace. The new board members listened intently as I outlined our vision. Not just profit, but purpose. Not just success, but integrity. Not just business, but justice. "This company was built on lies," I told them. "We're going to rebuild it on truth." Outside my office window, the city stretched out before us, full of possibilities, opportunities, and yes, probably more predators like Amir and Vada. But now we were ready for them. "To new beginnings," Allison raised her coffee cup. "To justice," Quinn added. "To family," Samuel said, looking at all of us. I looked around at these people who had become more than friends, more than colleagues. They were my true family, forged in fire and truth. To all of it, I said, and to remembering that karma doesn't just happen. Sometimes it needs a little help from people who aren't afraid to fight for what's right. The meeting began in earnest, plans taking shape for a future built on integrity rather than deception. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside, surrounded by my chosen family, I finally felt complete. Not because of revenge, though that had been sweet. Not because of victory, though that had been necessary. But because we'd turned our pain into purpose, our betrayal into justice, our loss into legacy. And that was the best revenge of all.
Growing up in a family business isn't all cash registers and customer smiles. It's early mornings, late nights, and knowing how to handle a shoplifter before you're even old enough to drive. I'm Amelia, and I'd been the heartbeat of my folks' tableware store since I was a kid, slinging plates and cutlery instead of hanging out at malls. The day Mrs. Baker waltzed into our shop changed everything. She owned the bakery next door, and everyone knew her for her sharp tongue and even sharper business sense. I was arranging some fine china, the kind that's too fancy for everyday use, when I heard her heavy steps approaching. "Charlie," she boomed, never one to waste time on pleasantries. "Got a minute?" My dad, a man who never hurried his words, wiped his hands on his apron and nodded. "Sure thing, Barbara. What's on your mind?" They stepped into his cramped office, leaving the door slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, so I edged closer, pretending to fuss over an unruly stack of napkins. "I'm cutting straight to the chase, Charlie," Mrs. Baker said, her voice a mix of business and something else, something like excitement but sharper. "I want to merge our shops. Expand. Think about it, my pastries on your plates. It's a goldmine." I could almost hear the gears turning in Dad's head. He was cautious, always had been, but Barbara Baker didn't just throw ideas around. "And there's more," she continued, lowering her voice so I had to strain to catch it. "I think our kids should get hitched. It'll cement the deal. What do you say?" Hitched? To Mark Baker? The idea seemed ludicrous. He was nearly 30, and sure, not bad looking, but marriage? I barely knew the guy. Dad coughed, clearly caught off guard. "Well, that's quite a proposal, Barbara. Marriage is a big step. Come on, Charlie. It's not the dark ages. It's just good business. Think about it. I'll send Mark over later to meet Amelia properly." Before Dad could reply, Mrs. Baker was already halfway to the door. She paused, turning back with a grin. "Don't take too long. I know a good deal when I see one." As soon as she left, I barged into the office. "Dad, you're not seriously considering this, are you?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I know, kiddo. It sounds out there. But maybe just meet him? No harm in that, right?" I was about to argue more, but the look on Dad's face stopped me. He was worried, really worried, about the store, about us. So I nodded, feeling like I was agreeing to scout enemy territory. That evening, Mark came over. He was taller than I remembered. "Hi, Amelia," he said, offering a hand like he was at a job interview. "Heard a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," I replied, shaking his hand, feeling the calluses on his fingers. Baker's hands. "Yeah, your dad's a legend around here. And Mom, well, she thinks this could be great for us. For everyone." Mark and I started dating not long after his mother pitched the idea of merging our families and businesses. It felt like I was living in a sped-up romance movie, but Mark made the whirlwind feel okay. He was the kind of guy who knew exactly how to make a girl feel special, always opening doors, bringing small gifts, and making sure I was comfortable. Despite the bizarre circumstances that brought us together, I found myself genuinely liking him. A year flew by, and before I knew it, I was saying "I do" in a simple but beautiful ceremony. We got married, and with our vows, the two family businesses became one. The merge was seamless on paper, but in practice, it was all orchestrated by Mrs. Baker, my new mother-in-law. She was a force to be reckoned with, steering everything with a stern hand and an eye for detail. Right after the honeymoon, which was more of a working trip to food expos than a romantic getaway, she wasted no time remodeling the store. We knocked down walls and created one large space that fused the bakery with the tableware shop. The new layout included a cozy seating area where customers could sip coffee and sample pastries on the fine china we sold. "I want people to see how the dishes can come alive when they're used," Mrs. Baker explained one morning as we surveyed the construction. "Amelia, I expect you to not just sell these pieces, but to show them off. Serve the customers, make the desserts appealing, talk up the plates. They're selling a lifestyle, not just pottery." Yes, Mrs. Baker, I responded, tucking my hair behind my ear as I took notes. She had a way of laying out her vision that left little room for input, but it was hard to argue when sales began to double. Living with Mark's parents was another part of the merger I hadn't been too keen on. Mrs. Baker insisted it made financial sense for us to stay with them. Why waste money on rent when you need to be on hand to help out? The store's just down the street, she'd argued. It was practical, yes, but living and working together with no break was suffocating. One evening, as I was wiping down tables after a long day, Mrs. Baker walked over with a stack of dish towels for me to fold. "Amelia, dear, you're doing a fine job here, but remember, this is your life now. No need for that college degree. This," she gestured around the bustling store, "is better than any classroom." I bit back my frustration, the words tasting bitter. "I know, Mrs. Baker. Amelia," she cut in sharply, "focus on what's in front of you. This business will be yours one day. You and Mark, running it together. Isn't that enough?" I nodded, forcing a smile. The truth was, it wasn't enough. I missed my studies, the sense of working towards something that was just mine. But my new role left little room for anything else. Life in the store became a routine, a rhythm dictated by Mrs. Baker's unwavering command. Days blurred, but one thing became increasingly clear: my dad was around less and less. At first, I thought he was just taking some well-deserved time off, but then days turned into weeks without a single sighting of him behind the counter or in the office where he used to manage the books. One Sunday, I decided to visit my parents at home. The atmosphere was different, quieter. Mom was in the garden, and Dad was sitting on the porch, looking out with a kind of faraway sadness. "Hey, Dad," I said as I approached, trying to keep my voice light. "Haven't seen you at the store much. Everything okay?" He sighed deeply, the weight of his words ready to fall. "It's the merger agreement, Amelia. Barbara had her lawyers set it up in a way that pretty much cuts me out. I can't make any real decisions anymore, and I only get a tiny share of the profits." Frustration boiled over, and I stood up, pacing the porch. I can't believe she'd do this. "And Mark, does he know?" Dad's expression softened. "I don't think he sees the full picture, Amy. Barbara's got him thinking this was all necessary to save the business." The next day, I confronted Mark at the store, waiting until we were alone. "Mark, we need to talk about the merger. Your mom's cut my dad out completely. Did you know?" Mark was rearranging some pastries, but he stopped and straightened up, his face setting into defensive lines. "Mom did what she had to do. My mom saved our businesses, Amelia, turned it into something profitable. We're doing better than ever, aren't we?" "Profitable? At what cost, Mark?" My dad's been pushed out of his own life's work. He didn't have an answer, just turned back to his work, effectively ending the conversation. The divide between us had never felt so wide. The very next day, Mrs. Baker cornered me by the coffee machines, her voice sickly sweet. "Amelia, dear, I hope you're not causing trouble. We don't need any mutiny on this ship." I met her gaze, my frustration hardening into resolve. "I just want what's fair for my dad, Mrs. Baker." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than any shout. "Listen, girl, don't poke your nose where it doesn't belong. That agreement was signed and sealed with your father's consent. He knew what he was getting into. I suggest you focus on your job and leave the business decisions to those of us who know how to handle them." Walking away, I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. It wasn't just the business that was under her thumb, it was my marriage, too. Mark's words echoed in my mind, a mantra of profit over family. The pandemic hit us like a sledgehammer. One day we were buzzing with customers, and the next, the store was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional echo of our footsteps. I remember standing in the middle of the empty store, the silence overwhelming. That's when the idea hit me. "Mrs. Baker, why don't we ramp up our online presence? We could start delivering. People might not come to us, but we can go to them." Mrs. Baker was rearranging a display that no one would see, lost in her thoughts. She paused, her brow furrowing. Online? Amelia, that's not how we've ever done things. But it's how things are now, I pressed, feeling the urgency. We need to adapt or we'll sink. We launched our online ordering system, and I took charge of setting up the delivery logistics. It was chaos at first, missed orders, delayed deliveries, but slowly, it found its rhythm. Before long, our sales began creeping back up, nearing pre-pandemic levels. Seeing the success, I was filled with a new kind of energy. Mrs. Baker, we should keep pushing this. Even when things go back to normal, this could be a new revenue stream for us. Maybe even specialize in custom confectionery orders online. Mrs. Baker was slicing bread, her knife hitting the cutting board with finality after each slice. Amelia, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll go back to normal soon, and this online fuss will be unnecessary. But Mark cut in, siding with his mother as usual. Amelia, we're just riding out the storm. Mom's right. People will want to come back in, sit down, enjoy the experience. This online thing is just temporary. The pandemic eventually receded, and true to Mrs. Baker's word, we returned to normal operations. The online delivery service was shut down, much to my dismay. I watched as our new online customers drifted away, their messages of thanks and requests for more deliveries going unanswered. I couldn't hide my disappointment. One evening, as we were closing up, I confronted Mark again. We're making a mistake, shutting down the online service. It was working. It was really working. Mark was counting the day's cash, not looking up. Amelia, the crisis is over, and we're going back to what we know best. This is my mother's business. She's built it from the ground up. We're not going to gamble with its future on a whim. Walking home that night, the streets quiet and the shop windows dark, I felt a deep sense of isolation. The rift between Mark and me grew wider with each step I took. It was one of those heavy, relentless rainy days that turned the world outside the store windows into a blur. I was tidying up the store hall, rearranging the chairs and wiping down wet tables when the door creaked open. A small figure stumbled in, her clothes soaked, her face streaked with tears. Hey, it's okay. You're safe here, I said, kneeling down to her level. Can you tell me what happened? Just then, Mrs. Baker came out from the back, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight. Amelia, what is this? Who is this child? We can't have beggars in the store. It's bad for business. Get her out. I was shocked, my stomach turning at her coldness. She's just a child, Mrs. Baker. She's scared and alone. Mark, who had been in the office, came to see what the commotion was about. His face mirrored his mother's disapproval. Mom's right, Amelia. We can't start letting street kids hang around. It sets a bad precedent. I called the police. Refusing to let the little girl shiver in the cold, I wrapped a nearby clean blanket around her shoulders and poured her a cup of hot chocolate, which she clutched gratefully, her small hands trembling. It wasn't long before the police arrived. After a brief conversation, they confirmed that the girl had indeed wandered away from her parents, who were frantically searching for her. They thanked me for keeping her safe and left to reunite her with her family. Once the police had left, Mrs. Baker turned on me, her face a mask of fury. Amelia, I'm docking your wages for today's disruption. And for the next 2 days, you're washing dishes to make up for the trouble you've caused. Mrs. Baker, that's not fair. I was just trying to help. Enough, she snapped. You want to run a charity, do it on your own time. This is a business, not a homeless shelter. That night, as I scrubbed pot after pot, my hands raw and my heart heavy, I couldn't help but think about how far Mark and I had drifted from the people we used to be. Every scrub of the scouring pad was a reminder of the love that had curdled into something unrecognizable under his mother's influence. I missed my life before the merger, before my dreams had been overshadowed by the harsh, unyielding world Mrs. Baker had created. More and more, I found myself dreaming of a way out, a path back to the person I used to be. A week after the incident with the little girl, the store was bustling with the usual Saturday crowd when a well-dressed man stepped in. He wore a sharp suit that didn't quite belong in our casual little shop, and his presence commanded immediate attention. I greeted him with a polite smile, leading him through our selection of fine tea sets, which he examined with an expert eye. "I'll take the complete set of these," he said, pointing to our most expensive porcelain. "And could you add a selection of pastries? It's for a special occasion." "Of course, sir," I replied, my hands carefully wrapping the delicate tea pieces as I packaged them securely. I then filled a box with an assortment of our finest pastries. He watched my every move, a thoughtful look on his face. As I handed him his purchase, he extended his hand, gripping mine firmly. "Thank you. You've been very kind. Actually, you showed kindness to my daughter last week. She told me how you helped her." I paused, surprised. "She's your daughter?" "I'm just relieved she's safe." The man smiled warmly, reaching into his jacket pocket and handing me a business card. "My name's Thomas Avery, and I'm a lawyer. If you ever need anything, feel free to call me." I glanced at the card, noting the law firm's name etched in bold. "Thank you, Mr. Avery. Actually, there might be something." "Oh?" His eyebrows lifted in interest. "It's a long story, but it involves a business deal made by my father that I think wasn't entirely fair," I said hesitantly. "Why don't you come by my office next week? We can look over the documents together," he offered, his tone sincere. I agreed, grateful for the opportunity. At home that evening, I was quiet during dinner, my thoughts swirling. Mark sensed my distraction. "What's on your mind, Amy? You've been off lately," he asked, his gaze sharp. I stirred my food around my plate, considering what to say. "Just tired, I guess." As I lay in bed later, the weight of my secret pressing down on me, I realized that telling Mark was not an option. He had chosen his side, and I had to choose mine. Mr. Avery was my chance to make things right, not just for my dad, but for myself. The following week, I met Mr. Avery at his office, a sleek, imposing building that made me feel out of place with its polished floors and stark modern art. Sitting across from him in the high-backed leather chair, I handed over the merger documents between my father and Mrs. Baker. Mr. Avery's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the pages. "There are several issues here," he said after a long pause. "The terms are unusually favorable towards one party. It's exploitative, and possibly even illegal, depending on the circumstances of the agreement signing." My heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. "Can we do something about it?" He nodded. "I believe we can. I'll need to do some more digging, but I'm willing to help you pro bono, given the situation with your father." "Thank you, Mr. Avery." I paused, unsure how to express my gratitude. "Don't mention it. Let's try to set this right." Leaving his office, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. The thought of going against my husband and his mother was daunting, but the possibility of reclaiming my father's rights was too compelling to ignore. As I approached our house, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtered out to the driveway. I paused, the realization hitting me like a cold wave. Today was our anniversary. How could I have forgotten? I opened the door to a scene of festivity, our living room transformed into a miniature banquet hall, filled with friends and family, all seemingly in high spirits. I stepped in, trying to muster a smile, but before I could get my bearings, Mrs. Baker spotted me. "Amelia, there you are, wandering the streets when you should be here hosting," she bellowed, her words slurred by drink. "We're celebrating, in case you forgot." I stammered an apology, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on me. "I'm so sorry, Before I could finish, Mrs. Baker's temper flared, and with a dramatic flourish that only a drunken mind could conjure, she hurled an empty ceramic plate in my direction. It smashed against the wall where my head had been seconds before. The room fell silent, the festive mood evaporating like mist. Mark staggered over to me, a glass of wine in his hand, his smile cruel. "Looks like you need to clean up, Amy. You're dirty as a beggar," he sneered, and then splashed the wine across my hands and down the front of my dress. The sharp, sweet smell of alcohol stung my nostrils as laughter erupted from Mrs. Baker. The room's atmosphere shifted, guests exchanging uncomfortable glances, their earlier merriment replaced by a tense silence. Something inside me snapped. "Enough," I said, my voice ringing clear and surprisingly calm in the suddenly quiet room. "I met with a lawyer today. I'm filing for a divorce, Mark." The words hung heavy in the air. Mrs. Baker staggered forward, her face contorted in a mix of rage and confusion. "Divorce? You ungrateful." "And I'm contesting the merger agreement," I continued, cutting her off. "There's been fraud, and it's going to be investigated. The documents have already been sent to the authorities and the courts." Mark's face went pale, his earlier bravado draining away. "You can't. Who gave you the right to?" "I gave myself the right," I shot back. "For years, I've been treated like a servant in my own home, pushed around and laughed at. No more." I turned to leave, but Mrs. Baker grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Amelia, wait. Let's talk about this. We can sort something out." I pulled my arm free, feeling a surge of empowerment. "Talk to my lawyer," I said, handing her Mr. Avery's business card. "From now on, any communication goes through him." I walked away then, up the stairs to our bedroom, their shocked and angry shouts fading behind me. Each folded shirt and tucked away photo a step closer to freedom. The trial began, and it was clear from the start that Mrs. Baker and Mark were on the defensive. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a conniving, envious woman who was out to ruin the family business out of spite. "Ladies and gentlemen," her lawyer began, his voice smooth and accusing, "Amelia here is driven by sheer envy. She has spun a web of lies, hoping to entangle an honest businesswoman and her son in her deceit." I felt a flare of anger but remained composed. Mr. Avery, my lawyer, was next to speak, and his calm demeanor reassured me. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that my client has acted not out of envy, but out of a need to correct a grave injustice. The merger agreement, which we will present, clearly shows manipulations and unfair terms that were hidden from Amelia and her father." As documents were presented and witnesses called, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. Mrs. Baker and Mark tried to defend their actions, but their arguments fell flat against the solid evidence we had gathered. When it was my turn to testify, I stood, feeling every eye in the room on me. I respected Mrs. Baker and never would have imagined that family could treat each other this way. This isn't about jealousy. It's about justice for my father and for me, about reclaiming what was dishonestly taken from us. The trial lasted for days, but finally, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty of fraud, those words echoed in the courtroom, a sweet sound amidst the chaos of the past months. The judge then proceeded to annul the fraudulent merger agreement and imposed a significant fine on Mrs. Baker, along with an order for financial compensation. However, Mrs. Baker's finances were a mess, it turned out. She couldn't afford the monetary compensation. Instead, she was forced to cede her rights to the bakery to me as a form of payment. My father and I became the sole owners of not just the tableware store, but also the bakery that had been the source of so much strife. Back at the store, which now felt truly ours, my father hugged me, his eyes wet with tears of relief. "Amelia, you've done more than just win back our store. You've restored our family's honor." Mrs. Baker and Mark were now in a dire situation. With no bakery and no savings, they were forced to find other jobs. The community's support had shifted, seeing them for who they truly were, and they struggled to regain any standing. As for me, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. I resumed my college studies, each class a step toward rebuilding the life I had put on hold. Life at the store was bustling, better than it ever was. With the bakery's integration, we introduced breakfast combos, pastries with artisanal coffee served on our finest china. It was a hit. Dad ran the floor, his joy in customer interaction evident, while I managed behind the scenes, planning expansions and new product lines. "This feels right, doesn't it?" Dad asked one day, as we watched a family enjoy their breakfast at one of our new tables. "It does, Dad. It feels like us," I replied, my heart light, my gaze steady on the bright future we were building. Not just rebuilding what we had lost, but creating something new, something better, fortified by the lessons of the past and hopeful for the future. "Melissa, you sure about this guy?" My best friend, Sarah, always had a way of cutting straight to the chase. "Jack's different," I said as I packed up the last of my apartment into cardboard boxes. "He's kind, genuine, and he loves me for me, not just some idea of me." Meeting Jack was like breathing fresh air. He was a software developer with a goofy smile that could light up any room. When we met at a mutual friend's party, he spent the evening making me laugh and listening to my stories about long night shifts at the hospital. It didn't take long for us to click. "Jack's mom is a bit of a tough cookie, though," I continued, deciding to lay it all out for Sarah. I hadn't told her much about Mrs. Cole. The first time I met her, she looked me over like I was a car she was about to buy, very skeptical. She made a comment about my job, said something like, "Nursing is such a cute little career, isn't it? Like I'm playing dress up or something." Sarah snorted. "Well, just watch yourself around her. These mother-in-laws can be tricky." Jack and I had dated for 2 years before he popped the question. He did it in such a simple yet perfect way, during a picnic in the park where we had our first date. It wasn't fancy, but it was us. I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small but lovely, filled with close friends and family, except Mrs. Cole, who spent most of the time critiquing the floral arrangements and whispering to relatives. I tried to brush it off. I was marrying Jack, not his mom, I reminded myself. Jack suggested buying a house in the suburbs, I continued. "It's beautiful, but the mortgage would mean tightening our belts for a while." "Damn, straight into the deep end, huh? How do you feel about that?" I hesitated, my hands fiddling with the tape dispenser. "I'm not sure. It's a big commitment, and with my shifts, it's not like I have a lot of spare cash floating around." "Make sure it's what you both want, Mel. It's not just his life, it's yours too." I knew she was right. The idea of moving to a quieter place was appealing, especially considering the chaos of hospital life. But the financial strain was intimidating. Still, Jack was persuasive, saying things like, "We'll make it work, Mel. We always do." And his optimism was infectious. "We'll see," I said finally. "Let's get these boxes down to the truck." It had been a few months since Jack and I moved into our new house. I was still adjusting to the rhythm of paying the hefty mortgage every month, while Jack took care of our other expenses. Life was settling into a new kind of normal until the day Jack came back from visiting his mom, and everything turned upside down. Jack walked through the door, not alone but with his mother, Mrs. Cole, who had a grim look and a suitcase that looked like it housed her entire life. "Mel, Mom's going to stay with us for a bit. She's not feeling great," Jack said, as if it was a small, trivial change to our daily lives. I stood there, mouth slightly open, a frown forming. "Jack, when were you going to discuss this with me?" My voice was calm, but the annoyance was hard to mask. "Look, I know this is sudden, but she's really ill," Jack replied, his eyes pleading for understanding. Mrs. Cole, setting her suitcase down with a heavy thud, chimed in. "Those doctors don't know anything. They just want to steal the little pension I have left. I'm going to follow a special treatment plan my friend suggested. She just got back from some island and swears by it." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Jack, we should have talked about this. We could arrange for a nurse or find a good facility." Jack's expression hardened. "Mel, I owe her. She's my mom. We're not sending her anywhere." Mrs. Cole walked over and hugged Jack tightly, giving me a look over his shoulder that could chill coffee. "Thank you, son. At least someone cares about me." As she released Jack and began surveying the room, her criticism started. "All this furniture is all wrong. It's blocking the energy flow. And, Melissa, really, this place is a mess, she declared, her voice filled with a mix of disdain and condescension. Jack rushed to her side, nodding and muttering agreements. I clenched my fists, feeling my space and my opinion shrinking by the second. Over the next few days, my home turned into Mrs. Cole's personal project. Every morning started with her critiques. Melissa, these curtains are all wrong. They block the sunlight and positive vibes. And why is there so much clutter here? Jack was no help. Every time I tried to discuss a boundary or compromise, he stood by his mother. Mel, she's just trying to help. Let's just do things her way for a while. One evening, I reached my breaking point. Jack, we need to talk. Now, I said firmly as I pulled him aside. Your mother is taking over our home, and you keep siding with her. You're my husband. I thought we were supposed to be a team. Jack sighed, running his hands through his hair. I know it's tough, but she's family. We have to look after her. She's old and alone. I get that she's your mom, but where do I fit into this? Am I just supposed to nod and smile and let her redo our entire house? When do my feelings get considered? My voice cracked a bit at the end. Jack looked torn, his face a mix of frustration and guilt. I'm sorry, Mel. I didn't realize it was this bad for you. Let's sit down with Mom tomorrow and set some ground rules. The next day never came for that talk. Mrs. Cole had bigger plans, and Jack, as always, was swept up in her current. I retreated, feeling more like a guest in my own home with each passing day. The tension in our house was ramping up each day, and I was caught in a relentless cycle of exhaustion. Balancing night shifts at the hospital with the increasing demands at home was wearing me down. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling night shift, I collapsed into bed, hoping for a few precious hours of sleep. But peace was a luxury I couldn't afford, not with Mrs. Cole around. Barely an hour into my sleep, her voice, shrill and piercing, jolted me awake. Melissa, how can you sleep at a time like this? I'm ill and there's nothing to eat. You need to take care of me, she bellowed from the kitchen. I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with fatigue, and stumbled into the kitchen. Mrs. Cole, I just came off a night shift. I really need to sleep. Can it wait a bit? She was rummaging through the cabinets, clattering pots and pans. No, it cannot wait. I need proper nutrition. Look at this, there's nothing here I can eat. I leaned against the doorframe, barely keeping my eyes open. What exactly do you need? I'll make something quick. This. She thrust a crumpled magazine page at me. I need a meal with these ingredients. They're essential for my condition. With a heavy heart, I started pulling out whatever was closest to the list, trying to cobble together a meal that would appease her. It was slapdash, but it would have to do. After eating, she wasn't done with her demands. Now, come rearrange my room. The bed needs to be on the other side, and hang the mirror on the north wall. It's good for prosperity. That evening, when Jack came home, I was at my breaking point. Jack, we need to talk. Your mom, she's not as sick as she says. I asked her to get checked at the hospital, to get a proper diagnosis, but she refuses. She doesn't trust hospitals. She's doing what she believes in. Why can't you support that? Because it's not practical. I'm a nurse, Jack. I know what care looks like, and this isn't it. She's capable of taking care of herself. She's manipulating us. Jack shook his head, disappointment etched across his face. I can't believe you, Melissa. You're supposed to be compassionate. How can you be so heartless? Feeling defeated, I walked away from the conversation, my mind a whirl of frustration and sadness. This wasn't the life I'd signed up for. I loved Jack, but living with his mother under these conditions was turning our home into a battleground, and I was losing. A month rolled by, and miraculously, Mrs. Cole was prancing around the house like a spring chicken, the picture of health. Her miraculous recovery had me doubting the severity of her illness in the first place. It was high time we discussed her moving back to her place. One evening, as we were clearing the dishes, I broached the topic. "Mrs. Cole, you seem much better now. Have you thought about when you might go back to your apartment?" She didn't even blink, washing a plate with a slow, deliberate motion. "Oh, I've taken care of that. I canceled the lease. I'm staying here permanently." I nearly dropped the dish I was holding. "Permanently?" "Yes, dear. It's for the best. I'm here with family." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't part of the plan. I found Jack in the living room, deep into some game on his phone. "Jack, we need to talk. Your mom just told me she's canceled her lease. She plans to stay here permanently." Jack looked up, his expression neutral. "Yeah, I thought she might. It's better this way, she's family." But we didn't discuss this. "Jack, we can't afford another person in the house. And honestly, her being here it's a lot for me to handle." Jack sighed, putting down his phone. "Melissa, it's only been a month. You haven't really given it a chance. We can make this work. We're a family." Feeling cornered, I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts to manage the mortgage and the growing expenses. Meanwhile, Jack's contribution remained the same, but the burden didn't feel evenly distributed anymore. Back at home, meal times turned into another battleground. Mrs. Cole insisted on a specific diet: lean, bland, utterly tasteless stuff that sapped the joy out of cooking and eating. One night, as I served dinner, Jack made a face. "What's this? It tastes like cardboard." "It's what your mother requires," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "Well, can you cook something different for me then? Something with a bit of flavor?" I clenched my jaw, holding back a sharp retort. "Jack, I'm not running a restaurant here. I'm working day and night. If you want something different, maybe help out?" Jack pushed his plate away, his mood darkening. "Forget it. I'll order something." The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Mrs. Cole, noticing the tension, finally spoke up one evening. "Melissa, I see you're stressed about money. I'll give you some each week to help out." True to her word, she started handing me $100 to $200 every week. It wasn't much, but it helped ease the pressure slightly. Yet, the core issue remained unaddressed. It started with little things: missing earrings, a bracelet here, a necklace there. I'd put them down, and then poof, gone. I thought I was just being forgetful, until more items began disappearing. First, it was my gold jewelry, and then household items like a vase and some small decorative statuettes. It didn't add up. I wasn't misplacing these things, they were being taken. One evening, I finally voiced my suspicions to Jack. "I think your mom might be taking my things. My jewelry's gone, and now other items are missing too." Jack's reaction was instant and intense. "I can't believe you'd think so low of my mom. She's not a thief." With no way to secure my belongings at home, I started taking my remaining jewelry to work. It was ridiculous, carrying around valuables, because I couldn't trust the security of my own home. But what else could I do? Then one day, I came home early from my shift, the sun still high in the sky. What I saw in front of our house stopped me dead in my tracks. Mrs. Cole had set up a makeshift table on the sidewalk, covered with what looked like a garage sale setup. But it wasn't just random knickknacks, it was my stuff, my cosmetics, some clothes, and even personal items, all laid out for anyone to buy. "Mrs. Cole, what is this?" I approached, my voice shaking with anger. "Oh, Melissa. I'm just helping out. You said we needed money, so I'm making some," she replied cheerily, as if she was doing me a favor. "This is my stuff. You can't just sell my things," I exclaimed, grabbing a sweater off the table. "Look, I'm just trying to help. You keep saying money's tight, so I thought I'd clear out some clutter and make a few bucks," she explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. I was seething, so that's where her money comes from, which she shared so generously with us. Without another word, I started packing up everything. My hands trembled with rage as I stuffed my belongings into bags. I called Jack immediately, my words tumbling out. "Jack, your mom is selling my things on the street. You need to come home now." He was silent for a moment when he arrived and saw the scene. His mother, caught in the act, tried to explain, but I was too furious to listen. "Melissa, she was just trying to help," Jack said finally, siding with her yet again. "Help? By selling my personal items?" I couldn't hide my disbelief. "This isn't helping, Jack. This is crossing a line." I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I hired a locksmith to install a new lock on our bedroom door. I moved all my valuables and anything I cared about into our room and turned it into my personal fortress. At least in there, my world remained untouched. Jack was cold about it, saying I was overreacting. "You're locking away from your family, Melissa. That's what you're doing." "Family doesn't steal from each other, Jack," I retorted, my voice icy. He didn't have much to say after that. The house felt more divided than ever, my little locked room versus the rest of the space, which seemed increasingly dominated by Mrs. Cole's whims. For a brief spell, life seemed to return to a semblance of normalcy. Mrs. Cole kept to herself, and my belongings remained untouched. I began to relax a little, hoping that maybe, just maybe, we had reached an understanding. But that peace was short-lived. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, too quiet. Instinctively, I felt something was off. I dropped my bag and headed straight for my room, the sanctuary I had locked away from the world. The door, which I always kept locked, was ajar. My heart sank. I pushed the door open and there she was, Mrs. Cole, rummaging through my dresser, her hands full of my jewelry. The sight of her ignited a fury in me I had never felt before. "Mrs. Cole, what on earth do you think you're doing?" My voice was sharp, laced with anger. She jolted, clearly not expecting me. Her face morphed quickly from shock to defiance. I stormed out to the living room and yelled for Jack, who was in the kitchen. He came running, a look of concern on his face that quickly turned to irritation when he saw the scene. "Jack, look. Look at your mother. She's stealing from me." I pointed towards Mrs. Cole, who followed meekly, clutching my jewelry to her chest. Jack looked from me to his mother, his expression darkening. "Melissa, why must you always assume the worst? She's my mother." "Your mother who's standing right here with my jewelry in her hands." I couldn't believe he was still trying to defend her. He turned on me, his voice rising. "You know what, I'm tired of this, Melissa. Tired of your constant complaining, your accusations, your distrust." His mother stood by, nodding along to every word he said, a smug look on her face. "You don't cook properly anymore, you hide things, you separate yourself from us. What kind of family is that?" Jack continued, his words slicing through any remaining bond we had. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone else, someone who would choose his thieving mother over his wife. "I want a divorce, Jack," I said quietly, the words tasting bitter but necessary. His response was immediate and cold. "Fine." The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, papers, and cold, silent meals. We agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds. I didn't argue, I just wanted out. I found a small apartment and moved my most precious belongings there, leaving behind a life I could no longer bear. Driving away, I didn't look back. I had new beginnings to chase, and this time, I would make sure they were filled with trust and respect, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Jack and his mother could have each other, and I would finally have myself. I came back to the house to pick up the last of my things, expecting it to be quiet. Instead, I was met with fury. As soon as I stepped through the door, Jack was on me like a storm. "There you are, you vile woman. Where is my car?" His face was red, his voice loud enough to shake the windows. "What are you talking about, Jack? I didn't take your car." I said, genuinely confused and taken aback by his aggression. Don't play dumb with me, Melissa. My car's gone, and you took it because you want revenge. He stepped closer, his eyes wild. His mother, sitting in a chair with a blanket around her shoulders, chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. She's always been awful, Jack. I told you she was no good. I was speechless. The situation was spiraling, and I had no idea how to calm it down. Before I could gather my thoughts to respond, Jack's phone rang. He snatched it up, still glaring at me. His face changed from anger to confusion as he listened. What? An accident? My car? He paused, looking between his phone and his mother. Who was driving it? His mother's face went pale. I watched as the truth came crashing down. The room went silent except for the voice on the other end of the phone line, which I couldn't hear. Jack ended the call and turned to his mother, his voice shaky with restrained rage. Mom, tell me you didn't take my car. His mother started to sob, her hands covering her face. I just wanted to go for a ride. I didn't mean any harm. You weren't supposed to drive it. You're not on the insurance. Do you understand what this means? Jack's voice rose with each word. I stood there, watching the drama unfold, the pieces falling into place. Jack's anger boiled over. Get out. I can't even look at you right now. You're going to pay for this, every last cent. His mother tried to plead with him, but he wasn't having it. He grabbed her things and shoved them at her, pushing her towards the door. Go. I'll be contacting a lawyer about this. She was crying, a pitiful, wailing sound that might have once made me feel sorry for her. Not today. Today, it was just noise. As the door slammed behind her, Jack turned to me, suddenly softening. Melissa, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Can we start over? Maybe we can. I cut him off, my own voice calm but firm. Jack, you never stood up for me. Not once. How could I ever trust you to protect me or us? I can't be with someone who doesn't see me, who doesn't believe in me. After the divorce was finalized, and the house sold, splitting the money felt like the last cord tying me to a life that was no longer mine. I found a cozy apartment in a friendly neighborhood. The first time I made the mortgage payment, I was relieved. It was nothing like the suffocating debt of our old home. This was manageable, something that didn't keep me up at night. The place was small, but every corner of it was filled with possibilities. Decorating it became my new project, a way to reclaim my space and my identity. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I was arranging some books on a new shelf, my phone rang. It was my best friend, Sarah. Hey, Melissa. How's the new apartment treating you? Sarah's voice was always bubbly, even through the phone. It's great, Sarah. Finally feels like I'm breathing again, I said, smiling as I looked around my little living room. I heard about the lawsuit. Jack really went through with it against his mom, huh? Her tone was a mix of disbelief and curiosity. I chuckled, not without a hint of irony. Oh, he did. And he won. His mom has to pay for all the repairs to the car. Last I heard, she had to pick up a job because of it. No way. She's working? After all those years of acting like the queen bee? Sarah's surprise was palpable. Yep, reality hit her hard. They'd been at each other's throats since the court decision. It's a mess, but honestly, Sarah, they dug that hole for themselves, I said, not able to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. After hanging up, I thought about how much had changed. Jack and his mother were a constant source of drama, and now, distanced from it, my life was mine again, quiet, peaceful, mine. Over the next few months, I threw myself into decorating my new apartment and taking up hobbies I neglected. My evenings were no longer about navigating family dramas, but about rediscovering what made me happy, reading, painting, and sometimes, just watching old movies. One evening, while I was painting a canvas with broad, vibrant strokes, my phone rang. It was Jack. Melissa, hi. Just wanted to check in. How are you? His voice was tentative, unsure. I'm good, Jack. Really good, actually. Just working on a painting right now. I responded, my tone polite but distant. That sounds great. I'm glad you're doing well. He paused, and I could almost hear him struggling to find the right words. Listen, I've been doing some thinking. I cut him off before he could continue. Jack, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But for me, I've already found it, my peace. I need to focus on that. Hanging up, I looked around my little apartment, my sanctuary, filled with things that brought me joy. The phone call hadn't stirred the old chaos, it had only affirmed my new path. Hi, I'm Jenna. My life, pretty much like my coding, was streamlined, efficient, logical. I worked as a website developer for a big IT corporation. Every day was a new puzzle, figuring out how to make shopping online as easy as breathing for people who'd probably never meet me. Everything was ticking along just fine until they shuffled me off to a different branch to help jumpstart a sluggish project. That's where I bumped into Alex. Now, let me tell you about Alex. He was like a whirlwind, always buzzing around, full of ideas, and always ready to grab everyone's attention in the room. I remember the first time we really talked. It was by the coffee machine, that old sputtering beast that was the unofficial meeting spot in the office. I was trying to figure out why it hated me when he sauntered over. Struggling? He had this smirk, like he knew exactly how annoying that machine was. Yeah, this thing is a beast, I replied, smacking it lightly. They say you gotta sweet-talk it, Alex said, winking. He picked up the sugar packets, shaking them like he was about to perform a magic trick. Or bribe it. Finally, coffee machine hissed and sputtered out my much-needed coffee. We laughed, and that's how it started. Simple. Over cups of terrible coffee, we started chatting about work, then movies, music, and everything in between. Alex wasn't just talk, though. The guy had ambition that could light up a city. He was in software development, always juggling half a dozen projects, each more complex than the last. A few weeks in, he asked me out. Not in a sweet, shy way. Oh no, Alex wasn't about that. So, Jenna, when are you gonna let me take you out? I promise an evening not as bitter as this office coffee, he'd thrown down, grinning over his mug. Dating him was a whirlwind. He was passionate, always pushing boundaries, making plans. We hit off so well that when it was time for me to head back to my old department, the thought of not seeing him every day was a downer. But we made it work. Long calls, weekend visits, and constant messaging filled the gaps until he proposed a year later. It was as direct as our first date invite. I laughed, cried a bit, and said yes. Soon, I met Alex's mother, Judith, a warm and inviting woman who welcomed me with open arms. Our connection was instant, bonded over Sunday dinners and shared stories of Alex as a cheeky child. The wedding was modest but beautiful, held in a small garden with our closest friends and family. It was perfect, filled with laughter, good food, and dancing under string lights. After our wedding, Alex moved into my apartment. It felt like the start of something wonderful, with every evening a chance to dream together. Life with Alex was never dull. We'd spend our weekdays buried in work, me at my corporation, and him at his buzzing tech startup. When the weekend rolled around, we'd switch off our work modes. Sometimes, we'd just kick back at home, or we'd head over to his mom's place. It was on one of those lazy Sunday afternoons at Judith's, when Alex first brought up his big idea. We were lounging in her sunlit living room, Judith fussing around with some tea and cookies. Mom, Jenna, I've been thinking, Alex began, his eyes lighting up the way they did when he was onto something big. What if we started our own thing? A platform for manufacturers to sell their products directly to customers. I remember looking over at Judith, who just shrugged as if to say, "He's your husband, you deal with it." Alex, that sounds huge, I said, trying to keep my voice light. But starting something like that from scratch? It's a lot of money, a lot of risk. But think about the potential, Jen. We could build something amazing, all our own. He pressed, his enthusiasm bubbling over. I loved his passion, really, I did. But practicality was screaming in my ear. I know, love, but we need a solid plan. It's not just about having the idea, it's about making it work financially. Judith nodded, handing us our tea with a cautious smile. Alex leaned forward, his hands animated as he spoke. I've already looked into it. We can take out a loan, get started with a small team. I've even got some contacts ready to jump on board as soon as we say go. I took a deep breath, the weight of his expectations pressing down on me. Alex, starting a business on a loan is risky. What if it doesn't pan out? We'd be left with nothing but debt. Judith put a comforting hand on my shoulder, giving me a supportive squeeze. Alex shook his head, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. Sometimes you gotta take risks, Jen. No guts, no glory, right? I tried a different angle, hoping to get through to him. Look at all the successful platforms we know. They were built by teams, by corporations with deep pockets. We're just two people. But that's how the big players started, babe. In garages, at kitchen tables. We could be like them, and we don't have to quit our jobs right away. I'll go first, get it off the ground. The conversation went round in circles for hours. In the end, Alex did what he always did when he had set his mind on something, he charged ahead. The next thing I knew, he'd quit his job, taken out a loan, and rented a small office space. He was all in, expecting me to follow. When he told me what he'd done, my heart sank. Alex, this is too fast. We should have planned more, saved more. He was unpacking a box of his belongings in the new office, not even looking at me as he spoke. I thought you'd be happy, Jen. I thought you'd be proud. Despite his confidence, I didn't quit my job. I couldn't. The thought of both of us floating without a safety net was terrifying. Alex saw it as distrust, a lack of faith in his vision. I saw it as being the only thing that might keep us from drowning. Alex's new office was buzzing with activity by the time I swung by one evening after my own long day at work. He'd rented a sleek, glass-fronted space downtown, filled it with the latest tech, and hired a team faster than you could say startup. As I walked through the door, the first person to greet me wasn't Alex, but his new secretary, Lisa, a young woman with a bright smile. Hi, you must be Jenna. Alex has told us so much about you, she said, her voice as polished as the apple she was polishing on her blouse. Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you, Lisa, I replied, my tone hiding the churn of discomfort in my stomach. I glanced around, taking in the rows of busy desks, the oversized motivational posters screaming, "Think big." It felt more like a Silicon Valley scene than a modest startup. Alex spotted me from his office and waved me in. He was leaning back in his chair like a CEO from some glossy magazine shoot, grinning from ear to ear. Jen, what do you think? We're really kicking off here, he exclaimed as I entered. It's impressive, Alex. But aren't you scaling up too fast? I frowned, looking around at all the new equipment and employees. Babe, to make money, you gotta spend money. We need the best to be the best, he replied, his voice filled with that irritating confidence that had started to grate on me. But hiring so many people so quickly, the fancy office, the tech, how are we covering this? I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. Alex strutted from his desk, sweeping his hand through the air as if brushing away my concerns. Investments, Jen. You gotta spend big to catch the big fish. We're hosting a launch dinner next week, going to dazzle them with our vision. The dinner he was talking about turned out to be at one of the fanciest places in town. He'd even had glossy business cards made up, heavy and embossed with gold detailing, which he handed out to anyone who looked remotely interested in his pitch. Watching him work the room was like watching a play, every gesture calculated, every smile timed to perfection. As the evening wound down, I pulled him aside, my worry turning into frustration. Alex, this isn't sustainable. We should be careful with expenses until we actually start earning. Alex's face hardened, his smile slipping away. Jen, you really need to start seeing the bigger picture. This is how the successful do it. You think rich, you live rich, you become rich. That's the mindset we need. But real success doesn't just come from acting the part. I argued, feeling my temper rise. He laughed, a short, humorless sound. And what would you know about that? No offense, Jen, but I'm making something great here. Maybe try supporting me instead of dragging me down, huh? That stung, more than I expected. I backed off, swallowing the lump in my throat. Okay, Alex. Okay. From that night on, I stopped pushing back. I just helped out where I could, taking on tasks for the business in the evenings after my day job. It was clear that Alex didn't just want to create something lasting, he wanted the lifestyle, the status. A year into this grand venture of Alex's, the cracks in his ambitious facade had widened into gaping holes. The once bustling office was quieter now, the energy dimmed. Only a couple of tech specialists and Lisa, the secretary, were left. The rest had been let go one by one as the money drained like sand through fingers. I came home one evening to find Alex pacing in the living room, his face drawn, eyes flicking up to meet mine with a mix of defiance and desperation. Jen, we need to pump more money into the business. It's just a tough phase, it'll pass. He started off before I could even set down my keys. I sighed, dropping my bag onto the couch. Alex, we've been at this tough phase for over a year. How much more can we afford to lose? Maybe it's time to think about winding down. He rounded on me, his voice sharp and loud. Quit? You just don't get it, do you? You're too comfortable being a slave to your paycheck, too scared to really live free. His words stung, slashing through the tense air between us. A slave? Really, Alex? Is that what you think of me? Someone trying to keep us afloat while you play billionaire on borrowed dimes? I shot back, anger flaring. He didn't respond, just stormed out of the room, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. 6 months later, things hadn't improved. They'd gotten worse. One afternoon, I came home to find the driveway empty. He'd sold our family car, our only car, to fund another desperate attempt to save his sinking ship. He greeted me at the door with a sheepish look, almost like he knew he'd crossed a line. Jen, I had to. We needed the cash. I'll get it back, I promise, he said quickly, as if rushing to fill the silence before I could react. I just shook my head, too tired to argue anymore. Alex, where does it end? You sold our car without even talking to me about it. What's next? He shrugged, a hollow, defeated gesture. Whatever it takes. From then on, I pulled double duty. My paycheck covered our rent, the groceries, and every little expense in between while Alex's dreams sucked up everything else. Every night, I'd lie awake, the weight of our world on my shoulders, listening to the silence of the apartment. It was like living with a ghost, a shadow of the man I married. It was a sunny Tuesday morning when my phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Judith, Alex's mom. The tremor in her voice when I answered set my heart racing. Jenna, darling, I hate to bother you, but I've got these people here, these creditors, and they're talking about taking the house. They say Alex put it up as collateral. What's going on? I froze, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. What? No, that can't be right, Judith. Let me handle this. I'll call you back soon. I hung up, my mind spinning. Alex had promised no more risks after the car incident. I waited all day for him to come home, rehearsing what I would say, how I would stay calm. But when he walked through the door, looking tired and disheveled, all my plans fell apart. Alex, did you mortgage your mom's house for a loan? I blurted out, unable to contain my anxiety. He tossed his keys on the table, avoiding my gaze. Yeah, I did. We needed the cash flow to keep the business alive. It's going to pay off, Jen, you'll see. How could you gamble with your mom's home? I exclaimed, feeling my temper rise as my voice cracked with emotion. It's not a big deal, Jen. This is how business works. You invest big, you win big. We're on the brink of something huge here, he argued, his voice firm, almost rehearsed. But what about your mom? Where is she supposed to go? My words were sharp, cutting through the air between us. Alex shrugged, a casual, heartless gesture that made me flinch. She won't have to go anywhere. It's all legal stuff, nobody's going to throw an old lady out on the street. Plus, our state has mild winters, she'll manage if it comes to that. The ease with which he dismissed the gravity of the situation horrified me. That night, I couldn't sleep, tormented by the image of Judith, homeless because of us, because of a gamble Alex chose to take. The next morning, I made a decision. I went to my parents' house, seeking refuge and advice. My father, a seasoned investor who'd always been wary of Alex's rash decisions, greeted me with concern. "Jenna, what's wrong? You look troubled," he said, guiding me to the living room. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Dad, I need to borrow some money to pay off the loan on Judith's house. Alex put it up as collateral without telling anyone, and now it's at risk." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Jenna, I'll help because it's Judith, but you need to think hard about your marriage. Is this the life you want? Constantly cleaning up financial messes?" As I lay in bed at my parents' house that night, the reality of my father's words echoed in my mind. Alex had crossed a line, involving his own mother in his reckless schemes, showing a side of him I could hardly recognize. 3 days later, I returned home, my mind a chaotic mix of relief and unresolved tension. However, as I tried my key in the lock, it wouldn't turn. Confused and frustrated, I jiggled the key harder, thinking the lock was jammed. Nothing worked. With a sinking feeling, I dialed Alex's number, but it went straight to voicemail. With nowhere else to go, I headed to Judith's house, hoping to at least bring her some good news. I arrived at Judith's to find her pruning her rose bushes, the sun setting softly behind her. "Jenna, what a surprise, dear. Everything okay?" she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hi, Judith. I have some news. My dad agreed to help with the loan. You won't lose the house," I said, managing a small smile. Her eyes welled up as she hurried over and enveloped me in a warm hug, her relief palpable. "Oh, Jenna, thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're an angel." We were just stepping inside when the doorbell rang. Judith answered it, and there stood Alex, with Lisa clinging to his arm, smiling triumphantly. My heart froze. "Alex? What are you doing here?" I stammered, confusion and dread mingling in my chest. Alex's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Jenna, I see you've been busy. Unlike you, Lisa here supports me. In fact, she believes in me so much that we're together now. And oh, I filed for divorce. You're holding me back." Judith gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Alex, what?" "And there's more," Alex continued, pulling out some papers from his jacket. "I sold your apartment. Needed the money for the business. We'll be living here with Mom. You should find somewhere else to stay." The papers felt heavy in my hand. Divorce papers. Sale documents. My life, reduced to a few sheets of cold, legal prose. "You sold our home? How could you?" I whispered, my voice breaking. Lisa sneered, clinging tighter to Alex. "Because we're going places, Jenna. And you're just dead weight." Judith's face reddened with anger. She grabbed a nearby kitchen towel and attacked Alex and Lisa with it. "Get out. I'm ashamed of you, Alex. How dare you treat Jenna like this?" Alex and Lisa were screaming as they dodged Judith and the towel, and I was looking at this surreal scene with mixed feelings. As Judith was out of breath and stopped, Alex straightened his clothes and turned to a tearful Lisa with a wry grin. "Let's go. We don't need this." Before he could leave, Judith turned to me, her eyes fierce with resolve. "Jenna, dear, I'm signing this house over to you. You saved it. It's yours." Alex stopped in his tracks, his face a mask of disbelief. Mom, you can't. I can, and I will. Now get out. Take your friend and leave my house. The door slammed behind them, leaving a stunned silence. Judith turned to me, her expression softening. Stay here, Jenna. As long as you need. After the betrayal and upheaval of the last few days, I was emotionally drained but determined to set things right. Following my father's advice, I met with a lawyer he recommended, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Thompson. Over coffee in her stark, uncluttered office, we laid out the details of my case against Alex. So, he sold the apartment without your consent? Ms. Thompson asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Yes, and probably forged my signature to do it, I replied, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief as I handed her the fraudulent documents. Ms. Thompson's eyes narrowed. We'll take this to court. I'll file for the immediate reversal of the sale and push for a fraud charge. The legal wheels turned faster than I expected. In court, Alex's facade of competence crumbled under the weight of evidence. When confronted with the forgery, he had no defense. Your Honor, I was just trying to save my business, Alex stammered, avoiding my gaze. The judge was unmoved. You committed fraud, Mr. Carter. This court sentences you to probation and prohibits you from holding any senior management position in any company. Let this be a lesson in responsibility. Meanwhile, Judith, with Ms. Thompson's help, proved that Alex had taken the loan against her house without her knowledge or consent. The judge ordered Alex to compensate his mother for the emotional and financial distress caused. Outside the courtroom, as the final divorce proceedings took place, Alex's desperation was palpable. Jenna, please, don't ask for any more money. I'm ruined, he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a stranger driven by greed. I don't want your money, Alex. But you will replace my car, the one you sold without asking me. A couple of months later, his business, now hopelessly in debt, crumbled without his mismanagement to sustain it. Lisa left as soon as the reality of his financial situation hit home. Alone and barred from any significant corporate role, Alex was a broken man. But that was no longer my concern. With the legal battles behind me, I returned to the apartment that was once again legally mine. One afternoon, as I arranged books on a new shelf, the doorbell rang. It was the delivery of the new car Alex had bought me, a sleek, reliable model that was everything the old one had been and more. I signed off on the paperwork, the final tie to my old life with Alex severed. After the whirlwind of betrayal and legal battles, life settled into a new, steadier rhythm. My days were filled with the familiar comforts of my job. Each project and code line I crafted at work reminded me why I had clung to this stability, why it was so crucial not to leap blindly into Alex's fantasies. My salary, once stretched to cover his debts, now afforded me small luxuries and peace of mind. Every so often, I caught snippets of Alex's new life. He was doing physical labor now, something vastly different from the suits and boardrooms he had aspired to dominate. It was hard work, paying off the mountains of debt he had accumulated through his reckless ambitions. I felt a twinge of something, pity, perhaps, or just relief, that it was no longer my disaster to manage. Despite everything, Judith and I remained close. Our bond, forged in the fire of Alex's deceit, had only strengthened. She often joked, "You got rid of the worst part of our family and kept the best," during our weekly coffee meetups. Her laughter was a balm to the still tender parts of my heart. One breezy Saturday afternoon, we sat in her garden, the late spring blooms a burst of color against the green. Judith had just come back from her lawyer's office, a stack of papers in hand. "Jenna, I've made it official," she said, handing me a document. "The house will be yours one day. Not that I'm planning on going anywhere anytime soon." I took the papers, a lump forming in my throat. "Judith, you don't have to do this. You've already given me so much." She waved me off, her voice firm but kind. "I want to, dear. You saved this old house, you saved me. It's only right. We spent the afternoon reminiscing and planning future renovations to the house, small projects we could tackle together. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, Judith leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. You know, Jenna, I always thought it was the big, explosive moments that defined us. But it's not. It's the quiet days, the simple acts of kindness, the steady work. That's what really builds a life. Her words echoed in my heart as I drove home later. She was right. Life wasn't about the dramatic falls or the swift climbs, but about the steady, often unnoticed, day-to-day resilience. Back at my apartment, I looked around at the space that had once been a shared dream, now solely mine. It was quieter, simpler, less extravagant than Alex had wanted it to be, but it was real and it was mine. The next morning, as I prepared for work, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Grateful for the job that had sustained me, for Judith's unwavering support, and for the lessons learned. I was grateful, too, for my own strength, which had carried me through the storm and out the other side. My name is Carly, and this is how it all started, in a house too big for its warmth, and with a family that couldn't quite fit together right. I grew up in a city where the weather was as unpredictable as my mom's moods. I remember that morning, the clatter of dishes and the smell of burnt toast filling the air as Mom, Susan, moved around the kitchen. My stepdad, Richard, sat at the table, flipping through the newspaper, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. You need to eat quicker, Carly, Mom snapped as I slowly spread jam over my toast. I don't have all morning. I kept my eyes on my plate, counting the seconds. Richard sighed. Susan, she's just a child. Let her be. Mom muttered something under her breath, then turned her attention to me again. And look at you, always so sloppy. Can't you at least try to look decent? I glanced down at my shirt, noting a small stain I hadn't seen before. Before I could respond, the phone rang, cutting through the tension. Mom answered it with a huff, her voice sweetening as she realized who it was on the other end. Oh, hi, Tom. She cooed into the receiver. Yes, she's just finishing up her breakfast. No trouble at all. She shot me a look that said otherwise. When she hung up, she tossed the phone onto the counter. Your father will pick you up in an hour. Make sure you're ready. I don't want him coming to the door. Why can't he come in? I asked, my voice small. Mom's laugh was short and sharp. Why? You want everyone to see the kind of man he is? No, thank you. I have a reputation to maintain. I knew what she meant. Dad lived in a rundown part of town, his life a far cry from the polished existence Mom had with Richard. He drove an old, beat-up car and wore clothes from discount stores, but none of that mattered to me. He was Dad. He was kind. The hour passed quickly, and soon I heard the honk outside. Grabbing my backpack, I headed for the door. Remember what I said? Mom called after me. Directly to the car, Carly. No dawdling. Outside, Dad was leaning against his car, a smile lighting up his face when he saw me. Hey, pumpkin, ready for a fun weekend? I ran to him, his arms open wide for a hug. Yeah, Dad. As we drove away, I glanced back to see Mom watching from the window. Her expression was unreadable, but I knew she was relieved to have me out of the house. The drive was filled with small talk about movies and books, and plans for the weekend. Dad always made things simple, easy to understand, and never made me feel like I was too much or too little. He just accepted me as I was, and it was in those moments that I felt like I could really breathe. Life in our house took a turn when Mom announced she was pregnant again. I was 10, old enough to understand that this might change things, but not old enough to predict just how much. The day she told us, the kitchen had the sharp scent of lemon cleaner and the window was open, letting in the chatter of the neighborhood. I was doing homework at the table when she said it, just like that, no lead-in. I'm expecting a baby with Richard, she declared, her eyes shining. Richard was there, his hand on her shoulder, both of them looking like they'd won something big. Richard grinned, patting my head a bit awkwardly. You're going to be a big sister, Carly. Mom was watching me closely, like she was waiting for something more. Well, Carly? Aren't you excited? You'll have a little brother or sister. Yeah, excited, I mumbled, but her stare made me nervous. She had this way of drilling into you with her eyes. Over the next few months, the house filled up with baby stuff, new furniture, clothes, and toys. Everything was shiny and expensive, the kind of stuff that never filled my own room. Mom's belly grew, and so did her obsession with the perfect family image she wanted to showcase. The day my sister Lily was born, I was at school. I found out when Richard picked me up, his face serious. You've got a little sister now, Carly. Standing next to the crib, I felt clumsy and large. Lily was tiny, her face scrunched and red. I reached out, my finger lightly touching Lily's small hand. Her fingers curled around mine, and something tightened in my chest. She's really cute, I admitted, a genuine smile breaking through. Mom watched us, her smile tight but approving. Just remember, Carly, babies take a lot of work. You'll need to help out and not make things harder. I nodded, used to her warnings. Life at home shifted dramatically. Lily's cries filled the nights, and my help was enlisted more often than not. Carly, grab the diapers. Carly, can you watch Lily while I shower? It was tiring, but it was also the most Mom had spoken to me in a long time. Yet, it wasn't the warm, sharing tasks I had imagined. It was orders barked between the wails and the little sleep. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Lily's presence grew, as did the space she occupied in everyone's life but mine. My small corner room felt even smaller, my world reduced as hers expanded. I tried to find joy in it, in being the big sister, but often, it felt like I was just on the outskirts, looking in. Carly, don't be too loud. Carly, don't give her that, it's too small, she could choke. Carly, let's not bother your sister. Mom's constant instructions made it clear, I was the outsider in my own home, always stepping wrong, always too much or too little, never just right. When Mom told me I was moving in with Dad full-time, it didn't feel real. The news came out of nowhere on a cold Thursday evening. I was doing homework in my tiny room, the one that used to be a storage closet before Lily came along. You're going to live with your father, Mom announced, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. Her voice was flat, like she was talking about the weather, not changing my whole life. I looked up from my books, confused. What? Why? It's better this way. Richard and I can focus on Lily, and you, well, you need a change. She didn't even try to sound sorry. Does Dad even know about this? My voice cracked a bit. I wasn't sure if I was angry or scared, maybe both. He agrees. Thinks it's a good idea. She turned to leave, then stopped. Pack your things. He's picking you up tomorrow after school. The next day was a blur. Dad's car pulled up right after the final bell. I dragged my suitcase to the curb, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Dad jumped out to help, his face tight with worry. The drive to Dad's place was quiet at first. He kept glancing over, trying to read my face. You okay, Carly? I don't know, Dad. It's weird. Mom just kicked me out. Dad didn't answer right away. Look, it's tough, I know. But we'll make it work. You and me, okay? We're a team. Moving into Dad's apartment felt like stepping into another world. His place was small, cluttered with books and old furniture. There wasn't much room, and my room was actually the living room couch. That night, we sat at his tiny kitchen table, a pizza between us, trying to make plans. School's different here, but you'll adjust. You're tough, Carly. Tougher than you think. The first few months at my new school were rough. The hallways were battlegrounds, and words, sharper than knives, were often thrown my way. Hey, why you even here? Nobody needs another quiet mouse. Some would jeer as I walked by, my head down, my heart sinking a bit more each day. One evening, as I slumped on the couch staring blankly at a textbook, Dad came in from his late shift, looking as worn as I felt. He tossed his keys on the table and grabbed a couple of sodas from the fridge. He handed me one and sat down across, his brow furrowed with concern. "Carly, we need to talk about college. I've been doing some numbers, and well, I can't cover it. Not without some help." His fingers drummed on the table, a nervous habit of his. "So, what does that mean?" I felt a cold wave of worry. "It means there are a few ways this can go," he continued. "First, you could work hard, get involved, and maybe land a scholarship. Or, you might have to work and study, which won't be easy. And," he hesitated, then added, "there's always the option of not going at all." I shook my head immediately. "No, I don't want that. I'm not giving up on school." The determination in my voice surprised even me. Dad nodded, looking relieved. "I hoped you'd say that. So, think you can step it up? Maybe join some clubs, get your grades up?" From that night, things began to change. I approached school with a new purpose. Avoiding wasn't an option anymore. I started showing up early, staying late, and getting involved wherever I could. It wasn't easy at first. The library became my refuge, the place where I could escape the whispers and focus on what really mattered. One afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins, the school librarian who had taken a quiet interest in my frequent visits, approached me. "You're here a lot, Carly. Ever thought about helping out with the school radio? We need someone to manage the broadcasts." I hesitated, the idea of putting myself out there was terrifying. But then, I remembered Dad's words and my promise to myself. "Sure, I can help out," I managed to say. "Great. There's a meeting after school today. You should come," Mrs. Jenkins said with a smile, and just like that, I was involved. Working with the school radio was nothing like I imagined. It gave me a voice, quite literally, and people started seeing me differently. "Hey, that was a cool segment yesterday," someone would say, and I'd nod, a small smile creeping up. I even surprised myself by running for a student council position. Standing in front of the school, delivering my campaign speech, was one of the scariest things I'd ever done. "I'm here because I believe we can all do better, together," I declared, my voice shaking less with each word. When I won the presidency, even if only for a few weeks, it felt like a victory not just for me, but for anyone who had ever felt underestimated. By the end of high school, my efforts paid off. I received a grant to study finance in college, a field I had grown passionate about thanks to all the budgeting I did with Dad at home. It was more than just an escape from my situation, it was a chance to redefine it. The night I got the acceptance letter, Dad and I celebrated with cheap takeout pizza. "I'm proud of you, Carly. You did it," Dad said, his eyes misty. Leaving for college was bittersweet. I was ready to start fresh yet again, but leaving Dad and our little cramped apartment tugged at my heart. As I packed my bags, he came over with an old radio. "For your new dorm," he said, setting it beside my suitcase. College life started with its own set of challenges, but I was ready for them. I got an increased scholarship, which meant I didn't have to lean on Dad for money. That independence felt good, really good. I even managed to snag a part-time job at the college library. One evening, during one of our weekly phone calls, I told Dad about the job. He laughed, his voice warm and teasing over the phone. "Look at that, my daughter's keeping me afloat now." I chuckled, rolling my eyes even though he couldn't see. "Yeah, right, Dad. Just trying to follow in your footsteps without stepping on your toes." College wasn't just about work, I made sure to learn something from every class, every lecture. And then came the internship opportunity at a local financial company. The internship was intense. I was thrown into the deep end, analyzing market trends, preparing reports, and sometimes, handling clients under supervision. My boss, Mr. Henley, was a tough nut to crack, but fair. He didn't hand out compliments easily, so when he told me, "You've got a knack for this, Carly. Keep at it," it meant the world. As my college years wrapped up, I didn't just leave with a diploma, I left with a job offer from the financial company where I interned. It was more than I could have hoped for. I found a small apartment near work and settled into a rhythm. Dad was over the moon when I told him. "That's my girl, making waves," he'd said on the phone, and I could practically hear his grin. A couple of years into my job, I was climbing the ladder, making a name for myself in the firm. It was at a party thrown by one of my former classmates that I met Arnie. He was funny, smart, and had a kindness in his eyes that drew me in. We started dating, and it wasn't long before I felt like he should meet Dad. The day came, and I was a bundle of nerves. We drove to Dad's place, Arnie with a bottle of Dad's favorite whiskey in hand as a peace offering. Dad opened the door, saw Arnie, and the first thing he said was, "So, you're the young man making my daughter smile like that?" Arnie grinned, handing over the whiskey. "I'm trying my best, sir." They hit it off, talking about baseball, the whiskey, and occasionally embarrassing me with tales of my less graceful moments. Seeing them together, getting along, meant more than I could say. Now at 28, with a career on the rise and a man who cared deeply for me, life was looking up. It wasn't just about making it on my own anymore, it was about building something lasting. And for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited about what the future held. The day I got the call from Mom was like any other. I was in my apartment, sorting through some work documents, when my phone rang. Seeing Mom flash on the screen was enough to make my heart skip a beat. It had been years. "Carly, I need a favor," she said, without any pleasantries. "Lily is going to college in your city, and we paid her tuition. Can she stay with you?" The request caught me off guard. "Stay with me? As in, live here?" "Yes, it would really help us out. Plus, it could be good for you two to spend some time together," Mom pressed. I hesitated, the old feelings of being the less favored child creeping in. But I pushed them aside. "Okay, Mom. For you, I'll do it." Lily's arrival was like a whirlwind. She had 3 suitcases just for clothes and shoes, and her beauty routine took up more bathroom space than I thought possible. As days turned into weeks, her presence began to reshape my life. She was always either preparing for a party or recovering from one. Her idea of a quiet evening was coming home at 3 in the morning, tipsy and giggling on her phone. Her lifestyle was one thing, but what really strained our cohabitation was her attitude towards college and life in general. "I'm not really into the whole studying thing," she once said during breakfast. "I'm just here to have fun and maybe meet a rich husband." I choked on my coffee. "Lily, you need to take your studies seriously. Mom and Richard are paying a lot for your college." She shrugged, popping a grape into her mouth. "Whatever. I don't see why I should bother. That's like, your thing, not mine." But the real trouble started when Arnie came into the picture. He'd been over a few times since Lily moved in, and I'd noticed the way she looked at him. I didn't want to believe she'd actually try anything until one night, Arnie pulled me aside, his expression grave. "Carly, we need to talk," he said, guiding me to the balcony for privacy. "Lily's been making advances. She's been pretty explicit about what she wants. I didn't want to tell you, but..." I felt a mix of anger and embarrassment. "I'll handle it." Confronting Lily was inevitable. I found her in the kitchen, flipping through a magazine. "We need to talk about Arnie," I started, trying to keep my voice even. She looked up, her eyes cool. "Oh? What about him?" "He's my fiancé, Lily. And he told me what you've been doing. It needs to stop." Lily laughed, a sound that chilled me. "Please, Carly. Like I'd want your boring finance guy. But if I did, I could have him. I get what I want." That was the last straw. "You need to find somewhere else to live, Lily. I can't have you disrespecting me and my relationship under my own roof." Within an hour of her shameful leaving, Mom called. "How dare you kick your sister out? You always were a difficult child, Carly. I should have known better than to trust you with your sister," Mom hissed, before hanging up. Sitting alone in my suddenly quiet apartment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, it might never be enough for them. But as I looked around, I knew I had to protect my peace, my life, and my future with Arnie, even if it meant distancing myself from the family chaos once again. It had been 2 years since the fallout with Lily and the harsh words with Mom. My life had found a smoother rhythm, one filled with work achievements and quiet moments with Arnie. That peace was briefly interrupted when I heard about Lily through the grapevine. She had dropped out of college and was getting married to some rich guy she met. Curiosity and a sliver of familial duty nudged me to pick up the phone and call home to offer congratulations. It was Mom who answered, her voice as chilly as ever. "Hi, Mom. I heard about Lily. I just wanted to say congratulations," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, is that so? Well, don't bother. We're not waiting for you at the wedding. It's for rich people, not beggars," she spat out harshly. The words stung more than I expected. "I see. Well, I wish her happiness all the same," I managed before ending the call, the familiar hurt settling in my stomach. Later, I learned they spared no expense for Lily's wedding. Lavish decorations, expensive attire, and even live singers, the works. It was all over social media, a spectacle for all to see. Fast forward 2 more years, and life brought its own surprises. Arnie, with his gentle smile and eyes full of love, proposed. It was simple, but perfect. No fancy backdrop, just us and the sincerity of our bond. Of course, I said yes. Excited, I called Dad first. "Dad, Arnie proposed. We're getting married." "Really? That's wonderful, pumpkin. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Dad's voice boomed through the phone, filled with genuine happiness. Emboldened by his enthusiasm, I made a decision I knew might end in disappointment. I called Mom to invite her to the wedding. "Mom, I'm getting married. I would like you to come," I said, each word weighed with a mix of hope and apprehension. There was a pause, then a cold laugh. "To your wedding? With that man of yours? No, thank you. I don't mingle with losers." On the wedding day, everything was simple yet beautiful, the decorations minimal but elegant, the guest list small but heartfelt. Dad arrived early, beaming with pride. "You look beautiful, Carly," Dad said as he took my arm to walk me down the aisle. "Thanks, Dad. I'm glad you're here," I replied, squeezing his arm, the emotions of the day catching up to me. As we walked, I felt the weight of the past challenges lift. Here was a man who had never once made me feel less than loved, walking me toward a future with a man who cherished me just as deeply. The ceremony was everything I could have hoped for. Arnie's vows were heartfelt, and mine were a promise of commitment and love, witnessed by our closest friends and family. There were no grand gestures, just the pure, simple affirmation of our bond. Life had a way of coming full circle in the most unexpected ways. Just when Arnie and I were celebrating the news of our pregnancy, reveling in our little bubble of impending joy, my phone rang. The screen flashed Mom, a name that now brought more tension than warmth. "Carly," Mom's voice came through the line, sharp and urgent. "We need your help." "What's wrong?" I asked, despite a sinking feeling in my gut. "It's serious. We've lost everything. The house is mortgaged to the hilt, Richard's business has tanked, and, well, Lily's marriage didn't pan out either." "What happened with Lily?" I found myself asking before I could stop. She made some mistakes. Her husband has thrown her out, and he's demanding money for her cheating," Mom explained, each word laced with a mixture of anger and desperation. "We have nowhere to go, Carly. We need to stay with you, just until we sort things out." The request hit me like a ton of bricks. After years of minimal contact and outright rejections, this was too much. "Mom, I don't think that's possible." "What do you mean it's not possible? You owe us, Carly. After all, we are your family," she pressed, her voice hardening. "Oh, you? Mom, remember how you pushed me out when you thought I was too much to handle? How you never wanted me around unless it suited you?" I replied, my own anger rising. That was different, Carly. This is serious. We are talking about being on the streets here. She countered sharply. You made your choices, Mom. And I've made mine. I have my own family to think about now, I said firmly. There was a pause, a heavy silence that filled the space between my resolve and her disbelief. You ungrateful child. I'll sue you. I'll get what's owed to me. I couldn't help but laugh, despite the seriousness of her threat. Sue me for what, Mom? Taking care of myself? Dad was my guardian when you pushed me out, remember? You have no legal hold over me. I hung up, heart racing. It was a confrontation I had always dreaded, yet now that it was over, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had stood my ground, protected my boundaries, and most importantly, I was protecting the little life growing inside me. Arnie came into the room, his face etched with concern. Everything okay, babe? I took a deep breath, wrapping my arms around him. It will be. We're going to be okay, all three of us. He hugged me back, his presence a reassuring fortress against the chaos of my family. We'll handle whatever comes, together. This little one has the best, Mom. As we stood there, I felt the first fluttering movements of our baby, a gentle reminder of the new life we were about to welcome. It was a poignant moment, filled with the promise of new beginnings and the affirmation that some family cycles were meant to be broken.